glycogen. Because what they discovered, this is very recent, they didn't know this is like within the last 6 months. They used to think when you worked out with weights that let's say you do 3 sets of curls, you burn between 24 and 48% of the glycogen content of that muscle, let's say the bicep muscle. They now know.
Hello and welcome. I am Coach Castle, a certified biomechanics expert, nutritionalist, and efficiency coach. Subscribe to this channel to learn the most efficient ways to maximize your muscle growth and recovery, enhance your body, and advance your mind, all using the latest science. Welcome to Castle's Corner.
For contests, I had to limit myself. For experimentation, I found I couldn't take more than 150 grams of carbs to continue the fat loss. Some guys can take a lot more than that. But the point is that ketogenic diet it's not good for year round. It causes other possible health effects. In other words, you have to have, it's kind of ironic because, see, the funny thing is that, there's no dietary requirement for carbohydrates. See, that's the thing. There's no dietary, contrary to what you see all over the web and articles, you have to have this amount of carbs, that. There is no dietary requirement. Humans do not need to eat carbohydrate. The reason why is the body has other ways. The ketones I mentioned, for example, ketones are alternative fuel sources that can be used in the place of glucose, especially in the brain. Ketones are actually used by the brain more efficiently as fuel than glucose itself. Ketones can be used by most body tissues, not all. It can't be used by the eye and certain parts of the nervous system. But then you have, for example, you have what they call gluconeogenesis, which is where if your body is low in glycogen, or your nervous system does need a certain amount of glucose, a minimal amount, your body can convert other substances. For example, amino acids can be converted in the liver into glucose. This is gluconeogenesis. So can lactate that you produce when you work out. That's a kind of a fatigue byproduct, if you want to call it that. And then you have the 10% of fat is glycerol. Glycerol can also be converted into glucose. For these reasons, you don't need to have any carbohydrate. In fact, there was a study, I remember I wrote about it, where they had guys lift weights, 2 groups. One lifted weights and had carbs after the workout. And when you have carbs after the workout, it goes right to replenishing glycogen. Because what they discovered, this is very recent, they didn't know this is like within the last 6 months. They used to think when you worked out with weights that let's say you do 3 sets of curls, you burn between 24 and 48% of the glycogen content of that muscle, let's say the bicep muscle. They now know that that glycogen is stored in different compartments within the muscle. And the net effect is you burn more glycogen than was previously believed. So when you take in carbohydrates, let's say right after the workout, the body has a hierarchy. It takes those carbs and immediately sets them aside to replenish the glycogen that you used, right? But as far as, anyway, getting back to the study. So one group had carbohydrates. The guys lifted weights. One of the group had some carbohydrates. The other had no carbohydrates. And the hypothesis of the study was the group that worked out, exhausted some of their glycogen, and didn't have carbs, they would be glycogen depleted, right? They said, because they're not eating carbs, how are they going to replace? They weren't. They had as much glycogen replenishment as the others. It turns out the lactate that they produced during the workout was converted in the liver into glucose, went to the muscle, and replaced the glycogen. The enzyme converted in the muscle, glycogen synthase converted into glycogen. So, in other words, my point of that story is that it shows that there's literally no need for carbohydrates. So you could say, well, if that's true, then what's the problem with the ketogenic diet? I mean, why couldn't you stay on no carbohydrates? Well, a lot of it has to do with certain other effects it has in the body besides the carbohydrates. It's a long story, but to make a long story short, again, I believe it's good for short-term, let's say kick-starting fat loss. But after a while, you want to add, again, it depends on the individual. Some individuals can consume a lot more carbohydrates than others. I remember talking to Jay Cutler, who won the Mr. Olympia 4 times. He told me that he can't train hard unless he has 1,000 grams of carbohydrates a day. He says anything less than that, he can't train hard. Now, I thought back to my days of trouble, but I said, if I had 1,000 grams of carbohydrates when I was training for a contest, I would have looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. I would have not lost any fat at all. And a lot of it has to do with insulin sensitivity. The more insulin insensitive you are, the more sensitive you are to carbohydrates. Those are the people that have to be careful about carbohydrate intake. An estimated 75% of people walking around are probably insulin insensitive for a number of reasons. Could be because of high body fat levels, poor diet. There's a lot of reasons to explain it, but those people have to really watch the carbs. Again, if you're not insulin, the other 25%, you can have practically unlimited carbs and you will not get fat from them. I mean, I've had problems with some of these so-called experts, these people with the doctorates who they quote textbooks that say, you cannot gain body fat from eating any amount of carbohydrates. In other words, it's impossible. You cannot get fat from carbohydrates because the excess carbohydrates are oxidized in the liver. This is what they say, right? Now, I know from my personal experience and literally hundreds of others who I've observed, you probably have to, the notion that you can eat any amount of carbohydrates and not get fat is so ridiculous, so stupid, that yet they keep arguing. They have big fights with the ketogenic guys who claim, who say what I said about the carbohydrate. Oh, no, the body burns up carbohydrate. You can't get, that's nonsense. It's nonsense.
What is there, I haven't heard that actually. What is their explanation for getting fat?
Dietary fat. Fat. Yeah. In other words, you get fat from two things. I'm sorry, I have to be complete. According to these guys, what makes you fat are two things: excess calories in general, which is true, and excess fat. The second thing I have a problem with. Now, they go by the fact that fat doesn't require as much calories to metabolize as, for example, carbohydrates and protein. They say there's no de novo fat synthesis, meaning that the liver doesn't produce fat from excess carbohydrates, blah, blah. This is what the textbooks say. But fat has a more or less direct express, excess fat has a direct express route into fat cells. In other words, the body will take, if you eat excess fat, it'll shuttle the fat directly into fat cells. There's your fat. And especially if you eat excess calories. The bottom line, though, is they say excess calories more than anything else accounts for body fat, more than anything else.
That's just, it's like a crappy argument. Of course, excess calories, but why would you relate that to fat? We know how fat and carbs are stored,
Wait, you want to hear something interesting? I don't think it's come out yet. Maybe it has. I don't even remember. I wrote an article. I came across a study. It was a case study. It was only one guy. He actually wrote it up himself. It was in a medical journal. He went on an overeating program. He was an average guy who only weighed about 160 pounds, right? He decided to ingest 5,600 calories, which is way too much for him. But there was a difference. The amount of calories on both diets, he used two diets. The amount of calories on both diets was exactly the same. They called it isocaloric. There was one difference, though. One of the diets was a ketogenic diet where the calories from carbohydrates were replaced by fat. The other diet, of course, contained, fat and carbohydrates in this map. Well, it turns out that on the regular 5,600 calorie diet that included carbohydrates and fat, he put on, I think it was 3 or 4 pounds of fat, if I remember correctly. On the diet that contained the same number of calories, but didn't contain any carbohydrates, he lost 4 pounds of fat on the same amount of calories.